Let's talk about using an interpreter. I think this is something that a lot of people think they would know how to do, but then in the situation get surprised by something. So this is always something that's good for anybody to know, but especially as a signer, this is great for you to know. So um, we'll start with federal law. Federal law requires that all people have equal access to information and services, and so sign language interpreters are one way to provide deaf and hard of hearing signers with this access. Sign language interpreters may sign ASL or PSE, Pigeon Signed English, or SEE, Signed Exact English. That's also sometimes called manually coded English or MCE. It just depends on the deaf or hard of hearing consumer's preference. Interpreters facilitate communication, providing both parties with a language bridge to understanding. Interpreters are a hired third party and do not otherwise discuss or participate in the situation. Sometimes people think that an interpreter is a friend of the deaf person or related to the deaf person, and is just there to help out, which is not true. I may interpret sometimes for somebody that I know, but I've been hired to do so. All right. So, did you know this? Interpreters are required to sign everything they hear, such as sighs, a person who, maybe at the end of their sentence goes, they would interpret that. They would interpret bells or anything else that they hear in order to provide that full access to the deaf or hard of hearing consumer. Interpreters are also required to voice interpret everything they see signed by the deaf person to provide full access to the hearing consumer. Interpreters keep their work confidential. So I'm not going to go interpret something and then come and tell you about it. If I want to give you an example, which I sometimes do when I'm teaching ASL, I will not give any specifics of the situation. And this is very important for stronger relationships between the deaf and hard of hearing community and interpreters. The deaf or hard of hearing person will need a clear sight line of both the interpreter and what is being presented. So both lighting and seating should be considered. Many deaf people like to sit at the front of a class or whatever presentation, so that they can see both the interpreter and the presenter or slides that might be shown or something like that. Also consider, as part of inclusion, that videos should be captioned. If you are a presenter and you are showing a video as part of your presentation, it should be captioned, closed captioned. But videos may also be interpreted into ASL if the deaf or hard of hearing consumer prefers it. All right, so let's talk specifically. How do I use a sign language interpreter? So here are a couple of things to know. These are two very important things to know when you're using a sign language interpreter. ASL, American Sign Language, is very different from English. The interpreter may pause to think about the best interpretation or to try to convey concepts that don't translate directly. The second important thing to know is that interpreting is a mentally taxing process. You have to have quite good processing speed in your brain in order to keep up with two languages at the same time. And so in some circumstances, more than one interpreter, which we call an interpreting team, is needed to provide breaks so that the interpretation can be its best. Studies have been done, and after about 15 or 20 minutes of something that's kind of intense interpreting, the brain just starts to get tired. When I first started interpreting, I was assuming that I needed breaks because my hands would get tired. And after a while, that is true, but really, it's your brain. It's your brain that gets tired. And if you take a little break and come back, let somebody else have a turn, and then you come back, your interpretation is generally better and fresher. All right, so here are the expectations for using a sign language interpreter. We're going to talk first about your turn to talk when you are saying something. So here's what you do. You look directly at the deaf or hard of hearing person when speaking to them. Don't look at the interpreter. Look at the person, the deaf person that you're talking to. Speak at a normal but clear pace and volume. Don't speak really fast. Don't speak really slowly. Don't speak really loudly. Don't speak really softly. Just kind of be average. That's much easier for the interpreter to follow along with. The next thing to know is that you need to speak directly to the deaf or hard of hearing person by saying you. Do not address the interpreter and say, oh, tell him this, tell her that. Just look at the deaf person and say, do you have an appointment today? Or whatever, just directly to them. When you speak, the interpreter will sign what you say, including your voice inflection and tone. All right, so when it's their turn to talk, when the deaf or hard of hearing person signs to you, the interpreter will speak or voice what has been signed. This is often called voice interpreting. The first person language, like I or me, that you hear from the interpreter's voice refers to the deaf or hard of hearing person, not the interpreter. So for example, if the interpreter says, I'm happy to be here, it's because the deaf or hard of hearing consumer signed it. All right, one last thing. Did you know, I bet you didn't, did you know that not all interpreters for the deaf are hearing? A CDI, a certified deaf interpreter, is a deaf or hard of hearing expert in a signed language and is used in tandem with an ASL or any other signed language interpreter to produce a more accurate interpretation. So, an ASL interpreter's role is to interpret between a spoken and a signed language. A CDI's role is to clarify or specify any language used, almost like a tutor. Do you know what that word means? Let me explain that. CDIs are equipped to handle dialects or other cultural differences that an ASL interpreter may not be able to interpret. And now you know how to use an ASL interpreter.